Turn the car around, Harold, right now. The words came out sharper than I intended. So sharp that for a second, I hardly recognized my own voice. One moment, I was staring through the windshield at the long country road leading to my son's house for a family reunion. The next, every bit of color seemed to drain from my face. My hands went cold. My heart pounded so hard it hurt. Harold glanced at me, confused. Wanda, what's wrong? Please, I whispered, then louder, turn the car around. Now, we had been married for 38 years. He knew the difference between me being upset and me being truly afraid. Without another question, he checked the road behind us and guided the car onto the shoulder. Gravel crackled beneath the tires. Seconds later, we were driving away from the reunion. Away from the house where our son Brandon had promised there would be music, barbecue, balloons for the grandchildren, and a perfect afternoon together. But something wasn't right. A few moments earlier, I had seen something that sent a chill straight through me. A black pickup truck was parked behind a line of trees near the end of Brandon's driveway, nowhere a guest would normally park. Two men stood beside it. They weren't unloading food, they weren't carrying chairs, they were watching the road. Watching us. The moment our car appeared, one of them raised a phone to his ear. Then Brandon stepped onto the porch. He looked directly at our vehicle, and he didn't smile. Why would a mother need to run from her own son? And what exactly was waiting for us if we had kept driving? My name is Wanda Kelly. I'm 68 years old, a mother of two and a grandmother of four. Until that day, I thought the deepest hurt a child could cause was distance. I never imagined my own son could make me fear for my safety. As Harold drove farther down the road, he kept glancing toward me. Wanda, talk to me. I turned and looked through the back window. Nobody seemed to be following us. That should have made me feel better. It didn't. My chest still felt tight. Don't go back there, I said. Don't stop anywhere near that house. Just drive. He nodded once. Okay, that was Harold, calm, reliable. The kind of husband who didn't need every answer immediately. Still, I could feel the worry growing between us. For nearly 5 minutes, we drove without speaking. Finally, he pulled into an old gas station with a weathered sign and a small diner attached to it. Truck drivers stopped there for coffee. A few people stood near the pumps. An elderly woman watered flowers beside the entrance, safe enough, at least for now. Harold parked beside the building and shut off the engine. Then he turned toward me. Tell me what's happening. I tried to answer, but my throat felt dry. I grabbed a bottle of water from the cup holder, twisted off the cap with shaky fingers, and took a sip. I saw Brandon. He frowned. Well, yes, we were going to his house. I shook my head. No. I saw his face. That made him go quiet. Some things don't need explaining after you've spent most of your life with someone. Harold understood exactly what I meant. I wasn't talking about Brandon's features. I was talking about his eyes. He had my dark hair and Harold's strong jaw. As a little boy, he smiled so easily. When he was 7, he used to race to the front door every evening yelling, "Dad's home!" When he was 10, he cried over an injured bird and begged us to help it. Then, sometime around 16, things began to change. Not overnight, slowly, the lies became easier. The laughter became rarer. He grew secretive, defensive, quick-tempered. But even during those years, there was usually some softness left in him. Not today. When he stepped onto that porch and looked toward our car, his expression felt different. Hard, empty, like he was waiting for something. Like he already knew how the day was supposed to unfold. Harold leaned back. What else did you see? The truck, the men, I swallowed. They were hiding, Harold. They weren't guests. And Brandon looked at them before he looked at us. His forehead creased. You're sure? Yes. I reached for his arm. And the second they saw us, one of them made a call. Even now, remembering it made my stomach knot. Nothing about it felt normal. Every instinct I had was telling me something was wrong. Harold stared through the windshield. Maybe it's work-related. Maybe Brandon hired some people to help with the party. I wanted that explanation to be true. I wanted it badly. But deep down, I didn't believe it. You didn't see his face, I said quietly. Harold looked at me. That wasn't a son waiting for his parents. I paused. It looked like a man waiting for something to begin. He rubbed his chin slowly. Then we call the police. The suggestion should have reassured me. Instead, my stomach tightened. Because calling the police meant talking about something I had kept to myself for 3 months. And I was beginning to realize that silence is often where problems take root. I looked down at my wedding ring. My hands had steadied a little, only a little. There's something I should have told you. Harold's expression changed immediately. Not angry, just focused. What is it? Before I could answer, my phone buzzed inside my purse. Brandon. Every muscle in my body tightened. Harold glanced at the screen. You don't have to answer. But I needed to hear his voice. I accepted the call and switched it to speaker. Mom, his voice sounded warm, friendly, almost cheerful, too cheerful. Where are you guys? Everyone's here. That single word made my stomach drop. Everyone. I wasn't sure anymore who that included. We stopped for gas, I said. A brief pause followed, small, but noticeable. That's strange, Brandon said. Dad filled the tank before you left. Harold's eyes met mine. I stayed silent. Brandon laughed softly. Mom, are you okay? You sound nervous. I looked at my reflection in the diner's window, pale, frightened, and suddenly I remembered another phone call. 3 months earlier, late at night. Brandon talking about money, pressure, doing something just once to fix everything. At the time, I convinced myself I had misunderstood. Looking back, I think I simply wanted an explanation that hurt less. Now I knew exactly what I had heard. Mom, Brandon said again, we aren't coming. The words slipped out before I could stop them. Silence. Then his tone changed. Not disappointed, not hurt, sharper. I felt Harold sit straighter beside me. We're not coming, I repeated. Brandon lowered his voice. Did somebody talk to you? My grip tightened around the phone. Talk to me about what? Another pause. Then the friendly voice returned. But it didn't sound real anymore. You're making this weird, Mom. The kids are waiting. Vanessa made that peach pie you love, Vanessa, his wife. For years, I thought she was simply trying hard to fit into the family. She always knew what to say, always knew when to smile, always seemed to know exactly what people wanted to hear. Lately, though, I'd started wondering if there was more calculation behind it than I wanted to admit. Tell the kids I'm sorry, I said, then I ended the call. For a moment, the only sounds were the low hum of the diner sign and the distant hiss of traffic from the highway. Harold turned toward me. Want, what's going on? I closed my eyes. 3 months earlier, Brandon had come to our house alone. No Vanessa, no children. He looked exhausted and restless. He asked for coffee but barely touched it. First, he admitted he'd made some bad investments. Then he told me Vanessa had debts too, serious ones. After that, he casually asked whether I still kept the property documents in the safe. At the time, I laughed. Why would you ask that? He laughed too, but there was something off about it. Now, sitting in that gas station parking lot, every piece suddenly fit together. The unexpected reunion invitation. Brandon insisting that Harold and I arrive before everyone else. Vanessa texting 3 separate times to remind us to bring the gray estate binder because the children supposedly needed it for a school project. The hidden truck, the waiting men, the look on my son's face. I turned toward Harold and finally said what I had been too ashamed to say. I don't think Brandon wanted a reunion. My voice barely rose above a whisper. I think he wanted us alone. I swallowed hard. I think he wanted access to the property records, our financial information, maybe more. My throat tightened. And I think those men were there to make sure we couldn't simply say no. Harold stared at me. The color slowly drained from his face. Before he could respond, my phone buzzed again. Not Brandon this time. A text from Vanessa. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. Come back now or Brandon will have no choice. A cold feeling spread through my chest. Harold leaned closer and read the message over my shoulder. At that exact moment, a black pickup turned off the highway and rolled into the gas station parking lot. The second the driver's door opened, my stomach dropped. One of the men from Brandon's driveway stepped out and looked directly at our car. Harold saw him too. He didn't panic. He didn't raise his voice. He simply reached for the keys and said, "Get down." I slid lower in my seat so quickly that my purse spilled across the floor. Lip balm, tissues, my reading glasses, a packet of peppermints, everything scattered around my feet. My heart was pounding so hard, it felt like the loudest thing in the world. Through the side window, I watched the man cross the cracked pavement, slow, unhurried steps. He walked like someone who didn't think we were getting away. Harold started the engine. The black pickup stopped 2 rows away, blocking the easiest exit. The man was tall and broad-shouldered, wearing a faded brown jacket and a baseball cap pulled low. I couldn't see his face. I didn't need to. I knew him. He was one of the men hiding near Brandon's driveway. Behind us, the diner door opened. A waitress carrying a tray of empty glasses stepped outside, glanced at the truck, then at our car, and slowed down. The elderly woman watering flowers had stopped moving altogether. For a moment, the whole parking lot seemed to hold its breath. The man lifted a hand as if he were greeting an old friend. Harold shifted into reverse. The smile disappeared from the man's face. Then another truck rolled into the lot behind us. My breath caught. They boxed us in. Harold tightened his grip on the wheel. Not yet. He cranked the wheel, backed over the curb, and cut across a strip of dry grass behind the station. The car bounced hard enough that my shoulder slammed against the door. I grabbed the handle above the window and held on. In the mirror, I saw a trash can topple over. Someone shouted. Then the black pickup roared to life. We shot past the diner and onto a narrow service road behind the station. Gravel sprayed beneath the tires. Harold wasn't a reckless driver, but in that moment, he drove like a man who knew getting away mattered more than doing everything by the book. I twisted around in my seat. The truck was still behind us, still following. "Call 911, Harold said. My hands were shaking so badly I hit the wrong button twice before finally making the call. The operator answered with a calm, steady voice. I explained as best I could that we were being followed near Oak Ridge County Road, that several men appeared to be trying to intercept us, and that what was supposed to be a family reunion might have been something else entirely. Even saying it aloud sounded unbelievable. The operator told me to stay on the line and keep updating our location. I gave road signs, described the truck, and told her there were at least 2 men involved. I didn't say Brandon's name at first, just thinking it felt painful. The road curved through open fields and scattered trees. The truck stayed close enough that I could see dust rolling off its hood. Then it accelerated. "They're getting closer," I said, my voice cracking. "I know." Ahead of us, the road split. One route led toward town. The other disappeared into farmland and old storage buildings. Harold didn't hesitate. He headed toward town. The truck followed. The operator said deputies were on the way, but the nearest unit was still several minutes out. Several minutes. At that moment, it sounded like forever. Then another call flashed across my screen. "Brandon." I ignored it. A few seconds later, Vanessa called. I ignored that too. Then Brandon called again. Harold glanced toward me. "Put him on speaker," I answered. "Mom, stop this right now." The fake warmth was gone. His voice sounded tense, angry, scared. I stared at the road ahead. "You sent men after us." "No," Brandon snapped. "I sent friends to bring you back before you ruin everything." "Everything?" The word landed like a slap. "What exactly did you plan to do? Scare us? Corner us? Take our documents? Our money?" It wasn't supposed to happen like this. Somehow that hurt more than if he had shouted, because it confirmed everything. Harold kept his eyes on the road. "Then tell me how it was supposed to happen." For a moment, all I heard was Brandon breathing. Hard, uneven. In the background, I caught pieces of other voices. Vanessa saying something sharply. A child laughing somewhere nearby. That nearly broke me. Our grandchildren were there, close to whatever ugly situation their parents had created. Then Brandon spoke again, quieter this time. "You were only supposed to sign a few things." My hand shook so badly I nearly dropped the phone. "What things?" "Transfer paperwork, loan documents, temporary authority forms." He hesitated. "Just until I fixed the business." Harold let out a bitter breath but said nothing. I stared straight ahead. "You invited us to a family reunion so you could pressure us into signing away our home." "It's not just about the house," Brandon burst out. "You always do this. You make it sound worse than it is. I'm drowning here. And you thought the solution was to pull us under with you?" Silence. Then he said the one thing I knew I would never forget. "You were never going to lose anything if you cooperated." The truck behind us moved closer. My stomach turned. That one word told me everything. He had expected resistance from the start, and fear had always been part of the plan. Very quietly, I said, "I don't know who you are right now." For the first time, his voice cracked. "Mom, please. If you go to the police, I'm finished." I almost laughed, not because it was funny, because I didn't know what else to do with that kind of heartbreak. "You should have thought about that before setting a trap for your own parents." Then I ended the call. For several seconds, neither Harold nor I spoke. The road widened ahead of us. Soon we reached a busier stretch near town. A pharmacy, a feed store, a traffic light. Ordinary life moving on as if nothing was wrong. People buying coffee, filling their tanks, carrying groceries. Nobody around us had any idea what was happening inside our car. The black pickup slowed once we reached the highway. Maybe the driver noticed the traffic. Maybe he saw the cameras. Maybe someone called him off. I never learned which, but he gradually fell farther behind. The 911 operators instructed us to pull into the parking lot of Cedar Pharmacy Plaza and wait near the entrance where security cameras and witnesses were present. Harold did exactly that. He parked beneath a bright light near the front doors. The truck rolled past once at a slow speed, then continued down the road. I sank back into my seat. Suddenly I felt exhausted, as if fear had been holding me together and had finally let go. Harold turned toward me. "We tell them everything now." His voice was calm but firm. No protecting Brandon, no minimizing it, no excuses. "Do you understand?" Tears filled my eyes. I nodded. "I know." 2 vehicles from the Bellevue County Sheriff Department arrived within minutes. One deputy was a woman in her 40s with tired but compassionate eyes. The other was younger, serious, observant. They listened carefully while Harold and I explained everything. At first, I felt ashamed, as if I were betraying my own child. Then the female deputy read Vanessa's text message. Her expression changed. After that, she listened to the recording from my 911 call and wrote down every statement Brandon had made. Then Harold described the trucks, the men, the pursuit. Finally, I forced myself to tell them the part I had kept hidden for 3 months. Because by then, I understood something I should have understood much sooner. Silence had not protected my son. It had only protected the problem. Brandon hadn't only asked about the safe or the property papers. There had been other questions too. Questions about my will. Questions about whether the property was legally in both Harold's name and mine. Questions about whether Melissa knew exactly how much our land was worth. At the time, I dismissed them. Then, a couple of weeks later, an old property survey disappeared from our home office. I blamed myself. Now I wasn't so sure. Detective Laura Bennett looked up from her notebook. Did your son have access to your house? Yes, I nodded. He still had an old emergency key. At least I thought it was for emergencies. She made a note. Have your son and daughter-in-law been under financial stress? I let out a short, humorless laugh. That's one way to describe it. As we talked, the pieces started fitting together. 2 years earlier, Brandon and his business partner, Trevor Nash, had started Kelly Urban Development. At first, things looked good. Then Brandon borrowed heavily, trying to grow too fast, while Vanessa spent money as though success was guaranteed. When things started slipping, they didn't cut back. They borrowed more. And eventually, some of that money came from people who weren't interested in waiting politely. Detective Bennett's pen paused. How do you know that? I looked down at my hands. Because I overheard him. I could still hear Brandon's voice from that late-night phone call. Low, tense. I'll get them to sign. Just give me until the reunion. Back then, I told myself I had misunderstood. The truth was simpler. I didn't want to believe what I had heard. No mother does. Harold closed his eyes briefly. I should have told someone. The words felt heavy coming out. Detective Bennett nodded. You're telling us now. I appreciated her kindness, but it didn't make the guilt disappear. The deputies asked whether Brandon had ever been violent. I thought about it. No, not exactly. There had never been a physical attack, but there had been warning signs, broken dishes. Doors slammed hard enough to shake the walls, the kind of anger people felt before they ever saw it. Then Detective Bennett asked the question that mattered most. Do you believe he intended to physically harm you today? I glanced at Harold before answering. I think he wanted us frightened enough to cooperate. I paused. And once fear becomes part of a plan, real harm isn't usually far behind. That answer seemed to tell her what she needed to know. The deputies said they would go to Brandon's property, identify the men, and make sure our grandchildren were safe. They also advised us not to return home. If anyone came looking for us, that would be the first place they'd check. Instead, they suggested staying with family. Melissa, my daughter, lived about 40 minutes away, practical, strong, the kind of person who noticed details. On the drive there, I couldn't stop thinking that I should have called her weeks ago. A patrol car followed us part of the way before turning off. The whole drive, I expected my phone to ring. It never did. For some reason, that silence felt worse than the calls. Melissa opened the door almost immediately. One look at me and she pulled me inside. David locked the deadbolt. Connor was sent upstairs. A few minutes later, I was sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of tea growing cold between my hands, telling them everything. Melissa listened without interrupting. First, she looked shocked, then angry, then hurt. I knew something was wrong with Brandon, she said quietly. But not this. Harold stood near the window watching the street. Did the police go to the house? Melissa asked. Yes, and the kids, they said they're checking on them. Melissa lowered her eyes. Those poor children. That was Melissa. No matter how upset she was, her concern always landed on the people with the least power. The evening moved slowly. David turned on the porch lights. Melissa kept checking her phone. Harold paced near the window. And I sat there thinking about Brandon at different stages of his life, trying to understand how the little boy I raised had become the man who set a trap for his own parents. Around 8:30, Detective Bennett called. I immediately put her on speaker. We went to the reunion address, she said. Most of the guests had already been sent home. I held my breath. Your grandchildren are safe. They're currently with a neighbor while we determine next steps. Relief hit me so hard my eyes filled with tears. And Brandon? Harold asked. There was a pause. Your son is not at the house. The room went still. Melissa leaned forward. What do you mean? He left before we arrived. Vanessa is still there. She's claiming the situation was a misunderstanding and says the men were business associates helping with event setup. Nobody at that table believed that explanation. Detective Bennett continued. One of the trucks has been found abandoned near a service road. We're still trying to locate both the driver and your son. A cold feeling settled in my stomach. Then she added something even worse. We recovered several unsigned property transfer documents from the dining room table, along with copied records from your family files. I closed my eyes. Mrs. Kelly, one of those documents contains a forged practice version of your signature. Melissa muttered something under her breath. Harold's hand tightened into a fist. Then Detective Bennett continued. A neighbor also reported seeing your son leave carrying a locked metal box from the garage. Do you know what might have been inside? The answer came instantly. The black steel lockbox. Not the safe inside our house, the old one. The one Brandon believed still contained the original deed to Silver Pine Lake Estate. If he'd taken that box, he was still chasing the same thing, not escaping, still trying to complete the plan. He thinks the deed is in that box, I said. Harold turned toward me. Are you sure? Yes. He asked about it years ago after my father died. Melissa crossed her arms. Is it still there? I shook my head. No. I moved the real deed to a bank safe deposit box almost 6 years ago. A brief wave of relief passed through the room. Then reality settled back in. The deed wasn't really the issue anymore. Brandon had still stolen the lockbox, forged my signature, and arranged a trap for his own parents. Detective Bennett told us to stay where we were, keep the doors locked, and prepare to give formal statements the next morning. After the call ended, the kitchen fell quiet. Melissa sat across from me. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then she asked a question I think she'd been carrying for years. Mom, can I ask you something? I nodded. Did you ever give Brandon reason to believe he could do things like this and still count on you to protect him? The question hurt because it was fair. I looked down at my hands. Yes, Harold let out a slow breath, not angry, just disappointed, because we both knew it was true. I had protected Brandon too many times, not the ordinary childhood mistakes, the bigger ones, the moments when helping slowly became enabling. When he was 15 and got caught stealing headphones, I talked the manager into giving him another chance. When he borrowed money from Melissa at 19 and never paid it back, I asked her to let it go. When he exploded at Harold during Thanksgiving over a loan, I changed the subject and pretended nothing had happened. Every time I told myself I was protecting the family. Looking back, I was protecting him from consequences. Melissa never said, I told you so. She didn't need to. Nobody needed to say it out loud. The truth was already there. David cleared his throat. We need a plan for tonight. The words brought us back to the present. He checked the locks again. Melissa closed the curtains. Harold called the bank's emergency line and asked them to flag any unusual activity involving our safe deposit access. I called our neighbor, Helen Whitmore, and asked her not to open the door for anyone, especially Brandon or Vanessa. She sounded stunned, but she promised. Around 9:30, Connor came downstairs in his socks and quietly asked if Grandma was okay. I smiled and told him yes, the way adults sometimes do when they're trying to keep their fear from becoming a child's fear too. Connor hugged me anyway. Connor lingered for a moment before looking up at me. Mom says Uncle Brandon did something bad. I rested my hand against his cheek. He made some very bad choices. Connor nodded with the serious expression teenagers get when they're trying to understand problems that belong to adults. Are you safe here? Yes. And for the first time all day, I actually meant it. That seemed to satisfy him. He headed back upstairs. Kids have a way of getting straight to the point. Are you safe? Are you okay? Did someone do something wrong? Questions adults spend years avoiding. Later that night, Melissa set up the guest room for Harold and me. Neither of us slept. I lay staring at the ceiling fan turning slowly above us while the house settled into silence. Beside me, Harold shifted every so often. Finally, he spoke. I keep thinking about that road. So do I. Neither of us needed to finish the thought. If I hadn't looked up at the right moment, if I hadn't listened to that feeling in my chest, if Harold had kept driving, we would have pulled into Brandon's driveway, carrying desserts and folding chairs, completely unaware of what was waiting for us. Harold reached over and squeezed my hand. You saved us. I stared into the darkness. I didn't feel brave. I felt tired, shaken, and deeply sad. I should have said something sooner. Maybe. His voice was quiet. But you said something when it mattered. That was enough to bring tears to my eyes. Sometime after midnight, my phone lit up. Brandon. Every muscle in my body tightened. Harold pushed himself up slightly. You don't have to answer. But I needed to hear what he had to say. I stepped into the hallway and answered. For a few seconds, there was only breathing and the faint hum of an engine. Then his voice came through. Mom, no anger. No charm, just exhaustion. Where are you? I asked. That doesn't matter. It matters to the police. A bitter laugh escaped him. So you really called them. You sent trucks after us. What did you think was going to happen? His breathing grew heavier. It wasn't supposed to go that far. There it was again. That phrase, not supposed to. as if forged documents, hidden men, and intimidation somehow became acceptable if everything stayed under control. I leaned against the wall, then stopped dancing around it. Tell me who these people are. For a long moment, I thought he'd hang up. Instead, he said, a lender. I closed my eyes. One lender needs trucks and men hiding near a driveway? It started with one lender, he snapped. Then his voice dropped. The debt got sold, more fees got added, more deadlines, more threats. Trevor disappeared. Vanessa panicked. I panicked. Trevor again. Where is Trevor now? I don't know. For the first time that night, I believed him. How much do you owe? Silence. Then finally, 465,000. My stomach dropped. I knew he was in trouble. I hadn't realized the hole was that deep. His frustration boiled over. I was trying to build something. Every time I got close, something fell apart. Equipment got delayed, contracts collapsed, employees needed paying. Vanessa kept saying one good project would fix everything. Trevor kept saying borrow now, pay later. His voice cracked. It just kept growing, and instead of telling us the truth, you decided to take it from us. I wasn't stealing. The denial came immediately. I was going to put everything back after the next project. For a moment, I just stood there in silence. The gap between what Brandon believed and what he had actually done felt impossible to cross. You forged my signature. It was practice, he said it so quickly it sounded rehearsed. I wasn't going to use that one. Practice for what? Nothing. No answer. Then I asked the question that had been sitting in my chest since the gas station. Did you know those men might hurt us? The pause told me almost everything. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. I told them not to scare you too much. I slowly slid down the wall until I was sitting on the floor. Not too much. Those three words hit harder than anything else he'd said. As if fear could be measured. As if danger became acceptable as long as it stayed within limits. Mom, his voice shook. I know how bad this sounds. It sounds exactly like what it is. I was desperate. Were we supposed to be desperate too? Silence. Then I heard another voice nearby, Vanessa, sharp, fast. A moment later, a car door slammed. I sat up straighter. Is Vanessa with you? No answer. Are the children with you? No. Relief flickered through me. Then Brandon spoke again. She's blaming me for all of it now. Of course she was. But this wasn't just Vanessa's doing. Nobody forced Brandon to invite us to that house. Nobody forced him to continue after seeing us turn around. Those choices belonged to him. What do you want from me? I asked. When he answered, he sounded younger than 41, almost like the boy he used to be. Tell them I didn't mean to hurt you. For one painful second, I remembered the child who cried over injured birds. Then I remembered the trucks, the forged paperwork, Vanessa's text message, the word cooperate, the phrase not too much. And whatever hesitation remained inside me disappeared. No, he inhaled sharply. You need to tell the truth yourself. Mom, you need to turn yourself in. Mom, no, listen to me. My voice stayed calm. This is the point where your life can still become honest. Not easy, not comfortable, but honest. I took a breath. You go to the police, you tell them everything. Every name, every document, every lie. The hallway fell silent. Or you keep running and become exactly the person you're pretending not to be. Several seconds passed. Then he whispered, you always loved Melissa more. The words landed harder than I expected. Not because they were true. Because they were familiar. I had heard versions of that complaint for years. And suddenly I understood something. Brandon had been carrying that excuse for a long time. If someone else was favored, if someone else had it easier, then maybe the rules didn't apply to him. Brandon, I said quietly, that's a lie you've been telling yourself for years. Silence. Melissa took responsibility when she made mistakes. Melissa told the truth even when it embarrassed her. Melissa accepted no when no was the answer. I paused. You wanted help without accountability. Rescue without honesty. A long silence followed. Then he said, if I turn myself in, they'll tear this family apart. No. My voice was steady. You already did that. Then I ended the call. I sat on the hallway floor for a long time afterward. Eventually, Harold opened the bedroom door and found me there. He sat beside me without saying a word. I leaned against him and cried quietly, not dramatic tears. Just the exhausted grief of a mother finally accepting what she had spent years avoiding. By morning, I felt empty. Melissa made coffee. David drove Connor to school and explained there was a family emergency. Harold shaved with a hand that trembled once. I put on a blue blouse and gray slacks. The kind of clothes that make you stand a little straighter when you're walking into something difficult. At the Bellevue County Sheriff Department, everything suddenly felt real. The paperwork, the investigation, the consequences. We reviewed copies of the documents, temporary authority forms, property transfer paperwork, emergency collateral agreements tied to a $350,000 loan. One draft would have given Brandon significant control over family assets, under the appearance of temporary assistance. Every page made my stomach turn. Detective Bennett sat with us while we reviewed them. This package was put together quickly, she explained. There are legal weaknesses throughout. But with enough pressure and enough signatures gathered at one time, real damage could have been done before anyone caught it. Harold's face darkened. I kept turning pages. Then I found the forged signature, my name, copied badly but close enough, Wanda Kelly. I stared at it until it no longer looked like my handwriting or even my name. Detective Bennett asked whether I recognized any of the notes written around the documents. I did. Some looked like Brandon's handwriting. Others looked very much like Vanessa's. Then she slid a photograph across the table. It had been taken at Brandon's house before evidence was collected. Near the edge of the photo, partially hidden beneath a legal pad, sat a yellow note card. My breath caught. I knew that card. I used yellow note cards for recipes, reminders, birthdays, and grocery lists. A month earlier, it had been sitting in my kitchen drawer. Can I see that closer? Detective Bennett enlarged the image. The note read, Bring Gray Estate Binder. Ask about bank access. Keep Harold calm. If needed, separate them. The blood drained from my face. Harold leaned closer. Separate them? This wasn't about paperwork anymore. This was planning, control. Separating one parent from the other to make them easier to pressure. I pressed my fingers against my lips. Detective Bennett's voice softened. Mrs. Kelly, is there anything else that suggests this was planned in advance? Anything unusual? Any questions that seemed strange at the time? And suddenly I remembered. 2 weeks earlier, Vanessa had pulled me aside during Sophie's dance recital. We talked about costumes, traffic, shoes. Then, almost casually, she asked whether Harold still carried his heart medication in his coat pocket when he traveled. At the time, it sounded like concern. Now I felt the blood drain from my face all over again. Harold looked at me. What? I turned toward him slowly. Vanessa asked me about your heart medication. The room went quiet. Detective Bennett's expression sharpened immediately. What exactly did she ask? I repeated the conversation word for word. The younger deputy sat up straighter. Harold's face lost color. You think they were planning to separate me from my medication? My eyes drifted back to the yellow note card. Keep Harold calm. If needed, separate them. A cold feeling settled in my chest. Maybe it meant distracting him. Maybe it meant leading him somewhere else. Maybe it meant creating enough confusion to get signatures. But after everything we'd already uncovered, innocent explanations were getting harder to believe. Detective Bennett stood. I need to pick another call. She left with the younger deputy, leaving Harold and me alone in the interview room. The room suddenly felt cramped. Harold looked at me, quietly stunned. Wanda, I reached across the table and took his hand. You're here, for now. That was the truth. For now. A few minutes later, Detective Bennett returned. The look on her face told me things had gotten worse. We found Vanessa. My stomach tightened, but not the way we expected. I braced myself. She was located at a motel about 20 miles east of town. She had cash, jewelry, and copied family financial records with her. Harold's grip tightened. Was she alone? Detective Bennett looked directly at me. No. The pause felt endless. Ethan was with her. For a second, I thought I'd heard her wrong. Ethan? She nodded. Yes. My chest tightened. Ethan Kelly, 15 years old enough to understand more than adults realize. Still too young to be caught in something like this. Was he hurt? Harold asked. His voice sounded rough. No. He's physically okay. Upset, but okay. I let out a breath I didn't realize I was holding. Then the questions started. Why was Ethan in a motel with Vanessa? Where was Brandon? What had he seen? Detective Bennett sat back down. We're trying to determine how much Ethan understood and whether he was being used to help Vanessa. Right now, he's with a juvenile support officer and a family services counselor. She glanced at her notes. He keeps asking for his grandmother. Of everything I had heard that day, that was the part that hit me hardest. Not the motel, not the stolen records, not even Vanessa trying to run. He keeps asking for his grandmother. I covered my face and took a slow breath. Harold rubbed my back. Across the room, Lissa whispered softly, Oh, Ethan. Detective Bennett gave us a moment before continuing. There's something else. We looked up. Ethan told the counselor that after your car turned around, his parents began arguing. Vanessa wanted to leave immediately with the documents and valuables. Brandon wanted to keep searching for the black steel lockbox because he believed it contained the original deed to Silver Pine Lake Estate. I could picture the whole scene. Their plan falling apart, accusations flying, panic replacing confidence, and Ethan stuck in the middle of it. Melissa stood abruptly. She took her own son while she was running. Her voice was filled with disbelief. That tells me everything. I didn't answer. I was thinking about Ethan and Sophie and Lucas. Three children watching their family come apart one piece at a time. Then another question hit me. Why Ethan? Detective Bennett checked her notes. According to him, Vanessa said the family was dealing with drama and she needed help carrying bags. She promised him fast food and told him not to ask questions. Harold muttered something under his breath. I couldn't make out every word, but I recognized the anger. Can I see him? I asked. Detective Bennett hesitated, then nodded, most likely. But first, we need to know if Ethan may have heard or seen anything important. I straightened in my chair. Ask, she turned a page. Has Ethan ever been used to carry messages, deliver papers, gather information, or help with things he didn't fully understand? My first instinct was to say no. Then memories started surfacing, little things. The kind of things that seem harmless until you look back. Ethan arriving with envelopes, Ethan being sent inside ahead of everyone else. Ethan casually asking whether Grandpa still kept spare keys in the ceramic jar near the laundry room. Questions that hadn't seemed unusual at the time. Now they looked different. Yes, I said quietly. Maybe I didn't see it clearly then, but yes. Melissa looked at me with understanding, not judgment, not blame. Just sadness. Somehow that was harder to bear. Detective Bennett made another note. You're helping more than you realize. Maybe. But it didn't feel that way. It felt like retracing years of missed warning signs and finally recognizing them. The next hour disappeared into statements, timelines, and questions. The station was bright, busy, and strangely cold. Phones rang, doors opened and closed, people moved constantly through the hallways. Someone brought coffee. Mine sat untouched. Close to noon, Detective Bennett led us into a smaller room. A counselor stood near the window. Ethan sat beside her, shoulders hunched, eyes red. The moment he saw me, he broke down. I crossed the room before I even thought about it. He wrapped his arms around me and held on, all fear, all confusion, all child. I hugged him as tightly as I could. You're safe. His shoulders shook. I held him a little tighter. You're safe now. He buried his face against my shoulder. He cried into my blouse the way he used to when he was little and scraped his knee at the park. Harold rested a hand on his shoulder. Hey, buddy. Ethan looked up. His eyes were red and swollen. I didn't know, Grandpa. I swear I didn't know. I know, Harold answered immediately. We know. Once Ethan calmed down, the counselor began asking gentle questions. At first, his answers came in pieces. Then the story became clearer. The reunion had looked normal. Food was set out. Some relatives were expected later. But Brandon and Vanessa told Ethan and Sophie that Grandma and Grandpa were arriving early because there was grown-up family business to discuss. Brandon had been angry all morning, constantly checking his phone. Two men arrived at the garage before the guests. Ethan overheard one of them say, if they sign, we're done by lunch. My stomach sank. Then Ethan told us something else. Something that made Melissa cover her mouth. I heard Dad say, just keep Mom busy and keep Grandpa outside if he gets difficult. Hearing that, everything we'd already discovered suddenly fit together. The note card, the questions about Harold's medication, the plans to separate us. None of it had been accidental. The counselor asked Ethan whether he knew what the papers were. He nodded. I saw Grandma's name on a lot of them. His voice was barely above a whisper. Mom said it was for a loan and Grandpa was being stubborn. My throat went dry. Then Ethan described what happened after Harold and I turned around and left. Brandon threw a chair across the porch. Vanessa screamed that he had ruined everything by letting us see the hidden truck. One of the men shouted that time was up, and someone else would collect what was owed if Brandon couldn't. That caught everyone's attention. Someone else. Even now, we still didn't know who was behind all of it. According to Ethan, Brandon drove off furious. Vanessa rushed through the house, stuffing jewelry, cash, and folders into bags. When Ethan asked what was happening, she told him they were going on an adventure. Then she told him he was the strong one she could count on. My hands clenched. Kids want to help the adults they trust. That's exactly what makes them so easy to manipulate. The questioning paused because Ethan was getting overwhelmed. I sat beside him while he sipped water from a paper cup. Even then, he refused to let go of my hand. A few minutes later, he looked up at me. Is Dad going to jail? Nobody answered right away. Sometimes adults soften difficult truths for children. This wasn't one of those times. Too much had already happened. I brushed a strand of hair from his forehead. Your dad made some very serious choices, I said gently. The police have to deal with that now. His chin trembled. But he's still my dad. I know. My voice stayed soft. And loving someone doesn't mean what they did was okay. Tears filled his eyes again. Not the frightened crying from earlier. Something quieter. The kind that comes when a child starts realizing the world isn't as simple as he thought it was. Before we left the room, I knelt so we were eye level. Listen to me, Ethan. None of this is your fault. Not one bit. Do you understand? He nodded. Your job is to tell the truth. That's all. One step at a time. Okay, he whispered. Watching him, I realized something. The answer wasn't revenge. It wasn't humiliation. It wasn't making Brandon suffer the way he had made us suffer. It was the truth written down, the truth documented, the truth told clearly enough that nobody could twist it into something else. That was enough. The rest of the afternoon moved quickly. Melissa took Ethan home so he could be somewhere safe and familiar. Family services began arranging temporary support for Sophie and Lucas as well. Vanessa was still being questioned. Brandon was still missing. By 3 o'clock, I felt exhausted down to my bones. But there was one thing I wanted done before the day ended. I looked at Harold. I want every lock changed. He nodded immediately. Done. And I want the family to know why. Melissa looked surprised. Today? Yes. Not long ago, I would have argued for privacy. I would have said we needed to protect Brandon's reputation. Keep things quiet. Give him time to explain. But keeping quiet had already cost us enough. No more hiding, I said. No more covering for things we know aren't true. Harold looked at me for a moment. For the first time in days, I saw a little relief in his eyes. That evening, after speaking with our attorney and updating the sheriff's office, we called the people who needed to hear the truth from us instead of through rumors. My sister Patricia Monroe, my cousin Elaine Foster, Melissa and David, a handful of close relatives, nothing dramatic. Just the facts. I sat at Melissa's dining room table and told them everything: the fake reunion, the forged documents, the men connected to Brandon's debt, Vanessa leaving with Ethan and family records, the children being safe, the police investigation, and the fact that I was done pretending none of it had happened. The reactions came one after another: shock, questions, tears. One relative kept shaking her head. Another asked if we were absolutely certain. Melissa answered before I could. Yes, Patricia cried openly. Then apologized for crying, which almost made me cry too. Elaine focused on practical questions. Where would the children stay? Did they need clothes from the house? What happened next? Not one person defended Brandon after hearing the full story. That mattered more than I expected. Once people understood what had actually happened, the excuses seemed to disappear on their own. At one point, Patricia looked at me and said, "Wanda, you sound stronger than I've heard in years." I glanced down at my hands. I had to be. Then I added something I hadn't planned to say. I spent too many years accepting things I should have confronted. Nobody disagreed. They all knew what I meant. When the calls ended, the house grew quiet again. Melissa reheated soup. None of us were hungry, but we ate anyway. Life doesn't stop just because everything feels broken. Ethan sat quietly at one end of the table. His eyes were swollen. His spoon moved slowly through the bowl. By then, Sophie and Lucas had arrived too, confused, tired. Staying close to Melissa, they didn't understand the details. They only knew their parents were gone, and Grandma seemed to hug them a little longer than usual. Later that night, I tucked Sophie into bed beside Lucas in the guest room. She looked up at me. Did I do something bad at the reunion? The question hit me harder than almost anything else that day. No, sweetheart. Then why did everybody leave? I smoothed her hair back. Because some adults made bad choices. Not because of anything you did. She accepted the answer the way tired children often do. Then she asked one more question. Will Mommy come tomorrow? I kissed her forehead. I couldn't promise something I didn't know. What I do know is that tomorrow you'll be with people who love you. When I stepped into the hallway, I stopped for a moment. That was the real damage. Not the money, not the forged paperwork, not even the investigation. It was children lying in borrowed beds wondering whether they had somehow caused any of this. Later that night, Harold and I sat on Melissa's back porch beneath the yellow porch light. The air had cooled. Somewhere down the street, a dog barked once. Then everything went quiet again. Harold held a mug of tea that had long gone cold. You were right, he said. About what? Silence. He stared into the darkness. We both used it. Maybe you more than me, but I did it too. I kept telling myself keeping the peace was the same thing as solving the problem. I nodded. So did I. He looked at me. Not anymore. No, I said. Not anymore. Looking back, none of this started in a single day. It grew slowly. Small excuses. Conversations nobody wanted to have. Warnings that seemed easier to overlook than confront. Eventually, those choices add up. And sooner or later, the truth shows up anyway. I didn't know it then, but one more test was waiting for us. At 10:15 that night, Detective Bennett called. I answered immediately. Her voice sounded tight. Urgent, Mrs. Clay, we've located Brandon's truck. I stood so fast, my chair tipped backward. Where? Near the access road to Silver Pine Lake Estate. My stomach tightened immediately. The lake property. My father's land, the cabin, the dock, the old storm cellar, a place Brandon knew as well as I did. A place tied directly to the deed he still believed he needed. Harold was already on his feet. He read my expression before I even put the call on speaker. Detective Bennett continued, "There are signs someone may still be there, possibly armed, and we found something else." My throat went dry. What? A handwritten note left under the windshield. I tightened my grip on the phone. For me? Yes. A brief pause followed, then she read it. "Come alone, Mom. You owe me one last conversation." A knot formed in my stomach. Then she continued. Underneath that, in Brandon's handwriting, were 6 more words. I already knew I wasn't going to like them. "Bring the real deed, or else." For a moment, I stared into the darkness beyond the porch. Bring the real deed, or else. Harold switched the call to speaker. "What does that mean?" he asked. "Who is he threatening?" "We don't know yet," Detective Bennett said. "That's why I need both of you to stay where you are. Do not go to the lake property. Officers are already responding." But even before she finished, I knew exactly what Brandon was trying to do. He wanted me scared. He wanted me to believe I could still fix everything if I just showed up. He wanted me to come alone carrying exactly what he thought he needed. Years ago, I probably would have gone. This time I wasn't. "We're not coming," I said firmly. "And I'm not bringing anything." "That's the right decision," Detective Bennett replied. "Stay available. We may need help with the property layout." After the call ended, Harold picked up the fallen chair and set it upright. Then he looked at me. "You're shaking." "Yes," I said after a moment. "I do." The days that followed changed everything. The search for Brandon ended, the investigation continued, and one truth after another finally came into the open. Months passed, court hearings replaced rumors, facts replaced excuses. And little by little, our family began learning how to live with what had happened. One afternoon, months later, Ethan asked me a question I had been thinking about for a long time. "Do you think you'll ever trust him again?" I looked at him for a moment. "But love isn't the same as trust." Ethan looked down for a moment, thinking about that. I watched Sophie and Lucas running through the yard, chasing bubbles that drifted through the late afternoon sunlight. "Not the way I used to," I said. "If trust ever comes back, it'll be because it's earned. And that takes time." He nodded slowly. "I think I understand." Maybe he did. He was young, but I think he understood more than most adults gave him credit for. Months later, after court appearances, attorney meetings, and stacks of paperwork I never wanted to see again, Brandon sent me a letter from county jail before sentencing. What stayed with me wasn't what he wrote, it was what he didn't write. There were no excuses, no blaming Vanessa, no blaming Trevor, no blaming debt. For the first time, Brandon wrote about his own choices. He said he finally understood that every shortcut he took had a cost, and eventually that cost landed on the people who loved him most. He wrote that hearing Ethan cry at the sheriff's office was the moment everything felt real, and he apologized. Not because he'd been caught, because he finally understood the damage he had caused. I cried when I finished reading it, not because it fixed anything. It didn't. Trust doesn't come back because someone writes a letter. But it was the first honest thing Brandon had given me in years. I wrote back once, just once. I told him I hoped he would spend the coming years becoming someone his children could feel safe trusting again. I told him that apologies matter only when they show up in actions. And I told him something I should have said long ago. I would not save him from the consequences of his choices. But I hoped those consequences would teach him lessons comfort never had. Eventually, Brandon was sentenced. Vanessa was sentenced too, though differently because of her role. Trevor Nash received his own punishment for the fraud tied to Kelly Urban Development. The company collapsed. The house Brandon and Vanessa had lived in was lost. It was painful, embarrassing, public, but the children were safe. In the end, that mattered more than anything else. Harold and I changed the locks, upgraded the alarm system, moved additional records into secure bank storage. But the biggest change wasn't any of those things. We stopped pretending. No more secret loans, no more just-in-case access to accounts. No more ignoring behavior that made us uncomfortable simply to avoid conflict. Several months later, Melissa said something that stuck with me. "The family feels different now." I asked her what she meant. She looked around the room before answering. "I think we're finally being honest with each other." I knew exactly what she meant. About a year after the reunion that nearly changed our lives forever, we held another family gathering, a real one. Not at Brandon's old house, not anywhere connected to bad memories. We gathered at Melissa and David's place under strings of warm lights hanging across the backyard. There were folding chairs, potato salad, sticky lemonade for the kids, and a little speaker that kept cutting out every time Lucas got too close while dancing. Ethan stood beside Harold at the grill arguing about hamburgers. Sophie helped me set napkins on the tables. Lucas ran across the yard laughing so hard he eventually tripped into the grass and stayed there giggling. Nobody was nervous, nobody kept checking the driveway, nobody was hiding anything, and nobody needed a signature. As the sun started sinking behind the trees, Ethan walked over and stood beside me. For a minute, we just watched everyone. Harold laughing at something David said, Melissa carrying a tray of food, Sophie chasing Lucas through the yard. This feels different, Ethan said. I smiled. It is. He looked around. Better, yes, I said quietly. Much better. We stood there for another minute without saying anything. Just watching, listening, being grateful. The evening carried on around us. Laughter, music. The smell of burgers on the grill. Children running through the grass. The kind of ordinary moments people often forget to appreciate until they've nearly lost them. And standing there, watching my family together beneath those lights, I realized something. Not that everything had been fixed. Not that the hurt was gone. But that we were finally building something on the truth instead of trying to protect a lie. For me, that was enough. More than enough. As darkness settled over the backyard, Lucas ran past laughing, Sophie chased after him, and Harold shook his head with a smile. I watched them for a long moment, then I picked up my glass, walked back toward my family, and joined them.